Okay, this is Reed Gray, the old Robo Hippy, back at you again. This is more on the safety video type things, and a quote I'm going to use time and time again, get a lot of mileage out of it, from Pat's Fan on the WoodNet forums: when sphincter tightening exceeds chuck tightening, you've got a problem. And this is one of those things that every time I even just think about it, it kind of makes me go but this involves where to put your hands when you're turning and sanding. You want to avoid injury, and so we'll touch on a couple of items here. Just about every single bowl turner that you see while they're turning, especially when they're doing the inside of the bowl, they're going to feel with their hands to feel for any bumps and lumps and stuff, because you can't see as well as you can when you're on the outside. And you have to be very, very careful where you're placing your hands in there, because if you don't, you can get pinched between the tool rest and the wood. If you're going to feel the inside of your bowl to feel for bumps and ridges while it's turning, you do not want your hand anywhere near the tool rest, because it doesn't take much for your hand to get kind of pushed by the wood down in between there, and it gets pinched, and that is a battle that the wood and the lathe are going to win every single time. If you want to feel while the wood is still spinning, feel up here where you're very far away from the tool rest, or better yet, feel down here for those little bumps and humps. That'll keep your hand out of harm's way, or you can just turn it off and then do the same thing. This is for sanding. Now, if you've ever done any hand sanding, which just about all of us have at one time or another, you're all familiar with this little move right here. The paper goes flying off. So the next time you try it, you're holding it twice as hard, and it'll grab and it'll pull your hand down. Okay. If you have the tool rest in here while you're trying to sand, just like if you're sticking your hand in here while it's spinning to feel it, you run a huge risk of getting your fingers pinched in there. So, this is your finger. Finger with a little sandpaper around it. Need I say more? Keep the tool rest far away from the work if you're sanding. Always, you just don't want to get pinched. Okay, so same scenario if you're turning spindles, and I know it's a temptation to keep your tool rest there. If you're doing production work and you want to sand it and then get the next one on there, get your tool rest out of the way. Again, if you're going to have your tool rest there, if you have it out here, if your hand goes down there, not a problem. If it's up here like this, sandpaper your finger or your hand. I had to do that one twice before I finally figured out how to keep my hand out of the way, and fortunately it was just minimal, but yeah, be safe. Now, since I'm talking about sanding in this clip and keeping tool rests out of the way, as a production worker, I turn a lot, then sand a lot, and my sanding process has been refined to the point to where I'm sitting in a chair when I do it and holding this thing out, my angle drill, which power sanding is definitely the most efficient. That gets tiring after a long day. Sitting in the chair takes some of the load off the feet. And then the other problem is holding this thing out here like this. So what I came up with, and this is very crude, this is one of the one-way inside bowl rests. First attempts, I just wrapped a couple of t-shirts around it, and that made a nice pad, but it didn't reach as far. And I have one of the articulated hollowing systems, and I kind of like, oh, put this together. So what it does for me, there we go. So what it does for me, I can hold my angle drill here, sand the inside, and then when I want to sand the outside, my other little arm over here comes to the outside, and I can hold the drill under here. So mostly it just takes some of the wear and tear off your body. This definitely is not a high-tech machine. It works. Somebody can make something that's a lot prettier and probably a lot more efficient, but just, take some of that extra wear off. One side point on this is not in any way, shape, or form a tool rest. If you even have the remotest dream about using this for a tool rest, it better be a nightmare. It's going to be bouncing up and down like a drop of water on a hot cast iron skillet. You will hurt yourself. You will break things. But it works. So we have a couple layers of foam here. There is a through bolt here, so this is like my articulated arm on my hollowing system. I've got a little piece of plastic there, and just keep this snug enough so that this rotates. And it is pretty much just like those articulated hollowing systems. Not pretty, but it works. So again, this is a scraping cut, roughing cut. Flutes are rolled over on their sides just about 90 degrees. And this is a scraping cut. Now, one safety concern here, and I'll turn the speed way down to show this. You do not want to come in like this. Your gouge is off balance, and we'll dig in and roll over. Full 90 degrees like that, it's a scraping cut. No danger of catching. Okay, this is a safety pointer for when you're using scrapers in the bottoms of the bowl. If you're making passes back and forth to flatten it out, you're using just this part right here. If you come all the way into the side, you can go from having this part to this entire wing on there, and that can put a lot of force on the tool and yank it right out of your hands. So always rotate with it, so you're keeping just this little spot on it, or use one that's got a very broad nose on it so you can't come up the wings very far without pivoting it like this. So this is a broad nose one, so again, if you're flattening, you can't make it up the corners with that, so that's good for going back and forth across the bottom. But if you have one that's swept back, beware of the possibility of having it in contact with the bottom and the side of the bowl at the same time. They can just overpower you and give you a nasty catch. Okay, this is another little safety thing, and I talk about doing this on the inside of the bowl. When you're doing the tool rest or setting it up, you want it to extend past the end a ways. Main reason is you don't want to come to the end of it and fall off. So move the tool rest past it. And then when you get to the end of your cut, you're still resting on the tool rest. Just a lot safer. So one of the safety rules that you will hear is don't move the tool rest while you are turning or while the bowl is spinning. This is why years ago there was a thread on one of the wood turning forums about, you know, you're a wood turner, and their thing was you don't move the tool rest while the bowl is spinning because it makes a lousy scraper. So that actually contacted the tool rest. Now if your blanks have been cut out on a bandsaw and they're pretty round, it's generally not that much of a risk. Still a little bit of a risk if you have a very rough sawn piece like this one. You put that on the lathe, you want to spin that by hand, or if it goes down to 50 RPM, make sure it's at the lowest possible setting. That'll help you position your tool rest for height and ways, but you definitely do not want to be moving your tool rest around with this one spinning at speeds. Generally, do not move the tool rest while the bowl is spinning. So again, on the safety issue with using a big Forstner bit like this one, drilling out a small blank, this one's about 6 inches. I've got it in a clamp. Basically that gives me a much longer lever to hold on to when I'm drilling down into it, just in case this big bit wants to catch. You can do it with a small bit if you're using or just trying to flatten it out, but basically keeps the hands out of the way and you're not going to get the thing yanked out of your fingers and slice your fingers on the edges there. But it just makes it safer, makes it easier to grab hold of, makes it easier to keep it secure. Okay, now this is the crack or the flaw that I was talking about. Main thing with something like this, if it's on a piece of wood, if you start turning at high speeds and stick your tools in it, chances are it's going to break off, fly off and hit you if you're standing in the way. So main thing is start slowly, nibble this all off, and then once your crack has gone all the way, then you can crank your speeds up a little bit, because then there's very little risk of anything flying off and hurting you. Okay, and I was talking about how I don't always use the tailstock, especially on smaller bowls. Larger bowls, it is a necessity just to get rid of vibration. I would consider this to be a medium-sized bowl, and when you're turning it, especially when you start getting out towards the edge. You can see it, you can feel it, you can hear it, but this starts vibrating because it's on a fairly long lever away from the center. It's also sticking out from the main part of the headstock here. So I'll turn it on, show you what that vibration sounds like. Do you hear that noise? That's the lathe vibrating. A relatively new invention for the lathes, especially these bigger ones. The tailstock is pretty heavy. They have a tilt-away setup. Some of them swing back out of the way. This one pivots. Makes it much easier. Loosen the lever. Pull it up. Lock it in place again. Crank it in. And when I start doing heavy roughing out here on the end, I just don't get that vibration anymore. Very, very handy setup. It does save a lot of wear and tear on your headstock bearings as well. This is another safety issue here. We've probably all done this at one time or another. You're done making your cut across the bottom or down to the bottom of a deep bowl. You start to pull the tool out to go get another one or to put it away. You stop looking at your tool, and while you're not paying attention, it catches the spinning edge there, slams down in. Always while the wood is spinning, pull the tool all the way out and then away from the wood, or turn it off first. And then when it stops spinning, you don't have to worry about this contacting spinning wood while it's not on. One point I preach a lot when I'm turning bowls: always round this edge over, don't leave it square. One reason, it helps with the drying, as in this fine edge is going to tend to crack a lot faster than one that's rounded over, and also that edge is sharp. It will do that to you if you run your hand or your arm or your coat up against it. So always round that edge over. Wow.